A mystic in Middle America? How did a Christian saint land in the American Midwest? Join me for the next few minutes and I'll share with you this truly epic hero journey of Charles Bojidar Ashanin. My name, by the way, is Peter Haskins, and welcome to another video on my channel. Make sure to like and subscribe, and if you're interested in hearing more about Dr. Ashanin, look for my books about him on Amazon.com entitled God Entered My Life and the Transforming Power of Suffering. Today I'll just give you the highlights. In 1990, I was an immature and inexperienced 23-year-old seminarian at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana, sitting in the back of a boring class on early church history, taught by an old Yoda-like professor named Charles Ashanin. Charles used to lecture with his eyes closed in front of the class. No kidding. No notes either. This was my first semester, but it was his last as he was preparing to retire after 23 and a half years of teaching at CTS. I was daydreaming about some girl, I think, when all of a sudden he was standing in front of me telling me to wake up. That embarrassing encounter began a friendship which has endured to this day, long after he passed away in March of 2000. He achieved a condition of permanence, which the church fathers called a saint. He was a mystic in every sense of the word. He could read thoughts, he was telepathic, he could tell many people about their future as he stood in front of them with his eyes closed. His influence upon this world continues to this day, and his cosmic job did not end when his body died. His story began on November 15th, 1920, in a little-known country called Montenegro in the former Yugoslavia. He came from a long line of Montenegrin royalty, being the great-great-great-grandson of a chieftain. He had an aristocratic feel about him, which the other jealous and small-minded faculty at CTS confused as arrogance. He was really just a king, and he couldn't hide it. Now, at the beginning of World War II, he was enrolled in a local college studying to be an Orthodox priest in the Serbian Orthodox Church when Nazi Germany declared war on Yugoslavia. By June of 1941, a civil war had broken out in Yugoslavia, which would change his life forever. He was briefly in the army of the Serb nationalists called the Chetniks, which put him right in the crosshairs of the communists. He was soon on the communist hit list and had to make a decision: stay in Montenegro and Serbia and be killed by the brutal communists, or flee the persecution as well as his homeland and his family and seek a new life in the West, maybe in Italy or America or somewhere, just not his homeland. He decided to leave. He was 24 years old, and he was not prepared. On his way toward the coastline of the Adriatic Sea, he was making his way through some timberland when he came upon a rabbit, and he startled it. The rabbit, instead of running away from him as fast as he could, jumped toward Charles and into his coat and began to burrow his way, seeking safety in this strange human being. Charles realized that his task was not to go and seek refuge in another country, but rather his cosmic job was to be a refuge for others. Now, he was definitely that for me. He gave me refuge as I began to make it through the world as a naive and unprepared, yet confident young minister. The rabbit incident was just the beginning of his story. He made it past the communists in war-ravaged Yugoslavia, and then north through dangerous Nazi territory in Croatia, and then on to a displaced person camp in Italy. Then the Anglican Christian Missionary Enterprise accepted him for entry into England as a student at Selly Oak and Woodbrook colleges. He finished his bachelor's degree in 1952 and then his PhD in 1955 from Glasgow University in Scotland, where he was awarded a Faulds Fellowship. All this time, he continued to be on the communist hit list as the Tito regime took its stranglehold on Yugoslavia, and his parents and his 4 siblings remained in their homeland. He began his teaching career at the University of Ghana in West Africa, then on to 2 teaching jobs at Allen College and Claflin College in South Carolina. In September of 1958, he married Natalie Aldonoff, and by 1960 they had moved to South Carolina and began a family with the first of their 4 children being born. By 1967, Charles was hired as an assistant professor in early church history at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. Charles was an amazing presence of peace at Christian Theological Seminary for over 23 years. Like a character out of the imagination of Tolkien, almost like he was a Gandalf, or a George Lucas, like he was Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was someone the mythologist Joseph Campbell would be very, very familiar with. Literally living the life of a mythological hero with this forced exit and expulsion from his comfortable and known world to his eventual return to his spiritual homeland. He was a spiritual signpost for those of us who wanted a deeper experience of the holy, but couldn't find that experience in the so-called progressive theology of shallow and hollow social ethics of the left, or the emotional dog whistling of the conservative praise worship political trap of the right. Charles Ashanin was a misunderstood mystic standing in the midst of a dying civilization. I believe he literally helped prop up our dying society, and we truly need that presence in our world today. In a 1962 essay entitled Christianity and Humanism, published in the Crane Review, he wrote, quote, "Christians whose theology does not reflect a deep-rooted religious culture are no more than religious ideologists, and their brand of Christianity is comparable to any kind of ideology, communism, for instance." End quote. In the ancient Greek tradition of the form of education called the Greek paideia, boy Charles stands beside the Cappadocian fathers of the 4th and 5th centuries who defended the idea of humanity's potential for spiritual evolution. He was a huge fan of the French mystic priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who championed this idea of the Christique element within our human species, with the unlimited potential for spiritual development called theosis or divinization, which the Catholic Church and all of Protestantism has forgotten or ignored. He was a mystic in the classic sense of these terms, and he taught at Christian Theological Seminary right here in the heart of Middle America. He led others into God consciousness, giving those of us with ears to hear a way out of merely imitating right moral behavior, which modern Christianity teaches us. And he led us into a deeper world, a deeper spiritual world, where prayer is actually learning how to listen to God, listening with your inner heart, listening for the voice of God speaking to you, just as God always has been your entire life. Charles taught me to listen.